If an advisor ever told you to never touch your TFSA until your RRIF is completely empty, that piece of advice could be quietly costing you close to $40,000 over your first 5 years of retirement. For a retiree living on CPP, OAS, and a modest RRSP that's not a rounding error, that's a car repair bill or half a year of property tax gone for nothing. Every dollar you pull from an RRSP or a RRIF counts as taxable income. That income is exactly what Service Canada uses to decide whether you keep your guaranteed income supplement and whether your old age security starts getting clawed back. A TFSA withdrawal counts as none of that. Same amount of cash in your pocket, a completely different effect on your government benefits. It's not a loophole. It's just how the income test is written. I've watched retirees with modest savings follow the standard order without question, RRSP first, TFSA last, and lose thousands of dollars a year in supplements they actually qualified for. Nobody ever told them the order mattered that much. It's a mistake that shows up quietly. One supplement check at a time, nothing dramatic, just a little less every month than there should have been. Today, I'm walking through the exact numbers, a simple swap in which account you spend from first, that can protect that money and keep your government benefits fully intact. If you're tired of generic retirement advice that doesn't account for how the Canadian system actually taxes and tests your income, hit subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is built for. Picture a retiree named Mike, 65, single, no workplace pension with $350,000 in his RRSP and $60,000 in his TFSA. At 71, the government forces that RRSP into a RRIF with a minimum withdrawal every year, 5.28% of the balance at that age, $18,480 on that amount alone. That's on top of his CPP and old age security already. Here's what catches people off guard. Pull an extra $12,000 a year from his RRSP instead of his TFSA during his first 5 retired years, and Mike can knock himself out of the guaranteed income supplement almost entirely, worth close to $7,900 a year to him. Pull the same $12,000 from his TFSA, and the supplement stays untouched. That single account choice is worth thousands over just a few years. But the real lever behind it goes back to how the test itself is built. The Guaranteed Income Supplement uses an income test that excludes old age security, but includes RRSP and RRIF withdrawals. TFSA withdrawals never enter that calculation, no matter how large they are. 2 retirees can pull out the exact same amount of cash and land in completely different places, purely because of which account the money came from. Mike's CPP works out to roughly $11,100 a year, and his old age security is close to $8,900 a year, but only the CPP portion counts toward the supplement test. The cutoff for a single retiree sits around $22,800 in other income before the supplement disappears completely. Mike's CPP alone leaves him about $11,700 of room under that line. Pull his extra spending money from the RRSP, and he crosses that line by a few $100s, enough to wipe out most of a supplement worth up to $13,478 a year at the maximum. Pull it from the TFSA, and he never gets close to the line. Statistics Canada figures show many retirees rely on CPP and OAS for the bulk of their income in those first years out of the workforce, which is exactly why a few $1,000s of extra RRSP withdrawal can flip the outcome so easily. The government sets that RRIF minimum because the RRSP was allowed to grow tax-deferred for decades. At some point, Ottawa needs its share of that deferred tax, and it doesn't wait for you to decide the timing is convenient. The trade-off nobody mentions is that spending the TFSA down early means it isn't sitting there later, growing tax-free, for the years when RRIF withdrawals are mandatory and flexibility is lower. Mike isn't avoiding a cost. He's choosing which years absorb it. I've watched retirees do the opposite instinctively, Protect the TFSA because it feels like the smarter long-term asset, and lose thousands of dollars in supplement payments they were otherwise entitled to. It's not a mistake born of carelessness. It's advice that was built for a different situation than the one they're actually in. But before any of this works, there's a bigger decision sitting underneath it, one most retirees make far too early or far too late. When you actually start collecting CPP changes every number we just walked through. Delaying CPP past 65 pays an extra 0.7% for every month you wait, which works out to 8.4% for every full year. Wait the full 5 years to age 70, and the payment comes in 42% higher than it would have been at 65. On paper, that beats almost anything else, guaranteed, inflation protected, and backed by the government. Here's what that guarantee leaves out. Mike's average CPP payment is about $925 a month at 65. Delaying to 70 raises it to roughly $1,314 a month. But he collects nothing at all from CPP for those 5 years in between. Add up the payments he gave up, about $55,500, and divide by the extra $389 a month from waiting, and it takes almost 12 years of collecting the higher amount just to break even. That puts the break-even point at close to age 82. The same shape shows up with old age security. Delay OAS past 65 and the payment grows by 0.6% a month, 36% higher if you wait the full 5 years to 70. It's a smaller bump than CPP, but it stacks on top of it if you delay both at once. So it isn't really about whether delaying pays more eventually. It does, if you live long enough. It's about what Mike is living on for those 5 years in between, and what that costs him elsewhere. Bridging 5 years without CPP means finding roughly $925 a month from somewhere, his RRSP, his TFSA, or part-time work. That's a mortgage payment for a lot of retirees, gone every month until the higher checks finally start. If he bridges the gap by drawing more heavily from his RRSP between 65 and 70, he can push his income high enough to lose the supplement we just talked about, and edge toward the OAS clawback zone too. A guaranteed 8.4% a year on paper can quietly cost thousands somewhere else. There's also a spousal piece worth knowing. A higher CPP payment usually carries through into a higher survivor benefit for a spouse left behind. That's not a reason to delay on its own, but it's one more variable worth weighing beyond just your own life expectancy. If you're in solid health, have family who lived well into their 80s and 90s, and have enough savings to comfortably bridge the gap without leaning on your RRSP, delaying to 70 is often still the stronger move. For some people, a few years of part-time work in the meantime does the same job as delaying without touching savings at all. But if your health is uncertain or your savings are tighter, taking CPP earlier and using that guaranteed income to protect your TFSA and your supplement eligibility can leave you further ahead, not behind. There's no version of this that makes you wrong for choosing either one. And the same tension shows up with old age security, except there it comes with a clawback that scares people into decisions that don't actually hold up once you see the real math. Old age security clawback isn't the government confiscating your pension. It's a 15% tax on the portion of your income above $95,323 for the 2026 income year. Once your net income passes that line, you lose 15 cents of OAS for every extra dollar you earn, up until your OAS disappears completely, somewhere around $154,700. That threshold rises a little most years to keep pace with inflation. Look at what that actually means in dollars. A retiree with $100,000 in total income sits about $4,700 over the threshold. Multiply that by 15%, and the clawback comes to roughly $700 for the year on $100,000 of income. The Canada Revenue Agency works this out automatically when you file your return each year. There's no separate application and no penalty box on your record. It simply adjusts the OAS payment going forward based on what you reported. That's not nothing, but it's also not worth reorganizing an entire retirement plan to avoid. Push the income up to $150,000, and the clawback grows to close to $8,200. That's the point where it starts to genuinely change decisions. Most retirees never get anywhere near that second number, which is exactly why obsessing over the clawback usually costs more than it saves. I understand why the word clawback triggers people. It sounds like the government reaching into your pocket and taking something that was yours, but it functions the same way as any other tax bracket. You don't stop earning more just because the next dollar gets taxed a bit higher. Compare it to a bigger, uncontroversial bill, like a full property tax installment, and the clawback on $100,000 of income is smaller than that. Yet it gets far more emotional energy than the tax bracket sitting right next to it. I used to push clients toward converting RRSPs early, just to dodge any hint of a clawback, even when it meant paying more tax up front than the clawback would ever cost. I ran the numbers for one client who paid about $12,000 in extra tax to avoid roughly $300 a year in clawback. That's when I stopped treating the clawback like an emergency and started treating it like what it actually is, a tax bracket. Once you stop fearing the clawback and start planning around the supplement instead, the actual order you draw money from starts to matter enormously, more than any clawback ever will. That's where the TFSA-first approach earns its name. Here's the actual strategy behind everything covered so far. For the first 5 years of retirement, roughly age 65 to 70, cover day-to-day spending from the TFSA first, not the RRSP. Let CPP and OAS, or a modest early CPP payment, be the only taxable income showing up on the return during those years. Call it a low-income bridge. It buys 5 years where taxable income stays low enough to protect the guaranteed income supplement and stay clear of any OAS clawback. The reason it works comes back to the same test already covered. Government benefit programs look at taxable income, not net worth and not spending. Statistics Canada figures show a large share of retirees rely on CPP and OAS for most of their income in the first several years after leaving work, which is exactly the group this bridge strategy helps the most. A retiree with $400,000 sitting across accounts can still qualify for income-tested benefits if the money actually being spent is coming out of a TFSA. Meanwhile, the RRSP keeps growing untouched until age 71 forces the minimum withdrawals to begin anyway. For Mike, that means spending roughly $12,000 to $15,000 a year from his TFSA between 65 and 70, instead of topping up from the RRSP. His TFSA holds $60,000, enough to cover 4 to 5 years of that gap comfortably. By the time he turns 71 and the RRIF minimum kicks in, he's already collected several years of a supplement he would have lost under the standard order, and his RRSP has kept compounding the whole time. It isn't a complicated spreadsheet. It's one decision, repeated for 5 years, before defaulting back to whichever account makes sense once the RRIF minimum takes over. If you want to check whether this applies to you, start with your projected income for the first 5 years of retirement, add it up from CPP, OAS, and any pension you already have. Compare that to the supplement cutoff for your situation. If you're already close to or under that line, protecting it by spending TFSA money first can be worth thousands of dollars a year. If you're well above it, the supplement isn't in play for you, but the OAS clawback threshold becomes the number worth watching instead. I remember sitting with a client, we'll call him Mike, since the details match his situation closely, right as he was about to pull $10,000 from his RRSP to cover a new roof. I stopped him and showed him what that withdrawal would do to his supplement. Moving the same $10,000 out of his TFSA instead kept roughly $2,400 of supplement money in his pocket over the following 2 years. Same roof, same $10,000, a completely different outcome on his tax return. That's the mechanism. But knowing which account to draw from only matters once you know how much you actually need to draw in the first place. And that number depends a lot more on where you live than most retirement guides ever mention. Most retirement guides use a version of the same shortcut, roughly $200,000 to $250,000 saved for every $1,000 a month needed beyond CPP and OAS. It's a reasonable starting point, but it assumes your cost of living looks the same as everyone else's, and in this country it almost never does. A retiree covering $1,000 a month in property tax and condo fees in downtown Toronto is working with a completely different number than a retiree in rural Saskatchewan or small-town New Brunswick, where the same $1,000 covers noticeably more ground. Run the generic ratio without adjusting for your own city, and you either save far more than needed, carrying stress you didn't have to carry, or you save too little and find out the gap the hard way, a decade into retirement. The difference between those two retirees can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars in required savings, even though the generic ratio would tell them to aim for the exact same number. Neither direction is free. Over saving costs years of a retirement that could have started sooner. Under saving costs options later, when there's the least ability to go back to work and fix it. The fix isn't a different ratio. It's building your own number from your actual property tax bill, your actual hydro bill, your actual car insurance renewal, instead of a national average that was never about you specifically. Even once the numbers are right, there's a part of this that math alone can't fix. And it's usually the part that keeps people up at night more than any spreadsheet does. There's a specific kind of fear that shows up right around retirement, the moment you stop adding to your savings and start pulling from them. Some people feel it as the discomfort of locking in a decision you can't undo, like delaying CPP for 5 years or converting an RRSP you've protected for decades. Others feel it as panic, the first time the market drops 15% or 20%. In the first year, they're actually living off that money. If that describes you, there's nothing wrong with you. Spending down money you spent 30 or 40 years building is a genuinely strange feeling the first few times you do it, even when the numbers say you're fine. Most people who built real discipline saving for decades find withdrawing that money uncomfortable in a way that has nothing to do with whether the math actually works. One thing that helps is separating your money by job instead of by account type in your head. Think of your TFSA as the bucket that covers spending when the market is down, so you're never forced to sell RRIF investments at a loss just to pay a bill that month. Your RRIF and RRSP become the long-term growth engine, doing their job quietly in the background. Knowing there's a bucket that never depends on this month's market price tends to matter more for how well you actually sleep than another decimal point of expected return. We've covered a lot of moving pieces. Let's bring it back to the 3 decisions that actually drive most of this. So this is what actually moves the needle. CPP timing depends on your health and your ability to bridge the gap without hurting your other benefits, not just on chasing the highest guaranteed number. Spending from your TFSA first in those early retirement years can protect thousands of dollars a year in government benefits that the standard advice quietly gives away. And the OAS clawback deserves a clear head, not fear. It's a tax bracket, not a penalty for doing well. Whatever your number ends up being, build it from your own bills, not a national average. If this helped you see your own numbers differently, hit subscribe. Your future retired self will notice the difference. Leave a comment with your biggest retirement question. I read them, and I answer the best ones in future videos. I'm Brian from Brian's Canadian Retirement Playbook. You don't need a perfect plan, you need an intentional one. I'll see you in the next video.